The Shining. This one is a long time coming. Drumdums isn't here anymore. Let's review The Shining.
Drum! Give me a drum!
The Shining stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, and is directed by Stanley Kubrick. What is up, guys? Without a doubt, one of the most requested reviews I have gotten for the past 4+ years on my channel is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. It's an intimidating movie to review just because it's a masterpiece. I mean, it's Stanley Kubrick. And there's so much to delve into. This is a movie that there are full conspiracy theory documentaries about. So you could talk for hours and hours on just the conspiracy theories alone about this movie. But we're going to talk about the movie itself, why it's so special, why it is always in the top 10 greatest horror films of all time. And it deserves that spot. It really does. So I just gave this movie a fresh watch, actually, with my wife a couple nights ago. I haven't seen it in a couple years. And it is one that I was kind of late to the game on, you know. I saw The Shining for the first time probably in the 90s. You know, it's one of those movies that I could see how some might not like it the first watch. You know, I posted on Killer Flicks, and there were a few people on there that said, I don't get it. You know, it's slow, it's boring. Some people might say that. And I will say, not to, you know, point anybody out, because everybody has different tastes, none better than others. But, you know, there is a type of horror fan, which I guess I could call the art crowd, you know, that they like these movies that really step outside the box and try different things. And sometimes these things don't necessarily work. Sometimes they sacrifice pacing, and, you know, and they're just slow movies to some people. Or they're just not people's taste. And then there's the other crowd that just doesn't like these types of films at all. You know, they like a certain type of horror film. It's one thing I love about horror in general. So anyway, looking forward to getting into this review, seriously. But first off, let's talk about the plot of The Shining. This is based on Stephen King's book. I know for a fact Stephen King, not a fan of Stanley Kubrick's work on The Shining, because I believe Stanley Kubrick was quoted as saying that King was not a great writer. And, you know, of course, you're going to butt some heads there. Look, when you have film adaptations, more times than not, they're going to veer quite far away from the source material. And, you know, I think most authors, they get that, including Stephen King. So go make your movie. I'm fine with it. This is still my book, whatever. And we're going to talk about one of Stephen King's biggest gripes about the movie when I get into the pros. Really, there are no cons for The Shining. But the beginning of this movie, we have this aerial shot in Colorado. We have this family, Jack Torrance, the Torrance family, and they're going to this new venture in their life. You know, they're going to be innkeepers at this hotel, the Overlook Hotel. And it seems like an easy gig, a fun gig, lucrative gig. But then once the winter comes in October all the way to May, nobody comes to the Overlook Hotel because it is high up in the mountains, because to get emergency equipment up there is a massive undertaking. So this family is stuck in this hotel for an entire season, the winter season. And we get what we call cabin fever. And you can see how anybody could do that. Anytime you have horror that deals with the mind, to me that's a great thing. And none do it better than The Shining. But throughout the movie, of course, Jack, he is a writer. He is wanting to write this book, you know, so he says this is a good thing. You've given me pretty much all this free time to just work on my book. No outside problems, and I can just, you know, get this thing done. But as time goes on, and you'll see throughout this movie, Jack starts losing it. Jack starts going crazy. And of course, who's he going to take it out on? He's going to take it out on his wife, Wendy.
To create a problem like this when I finally have a chance to accomplish something, when I am really into my work. I could really write my own ticket if I went back to Boulder now, couldn't I?
Who, by the way, Shelley Duvall does a phenomenal job in this movie, and it's always Jack Nicholson that gets the credit in this movie, deservedly so. But I'm going to give Shelley Duvall some massive props in this thing too, because without her performance to bounce off of Jack Nicholson's, I don't think it's as great a movie. And also one thing you must know, this movie is set in 1980. There was a tragedy in 1970 with this other family where the husband took an axe and killed his family. And his two twin daughters are one of the victims, and they play a big part in this movie. Why did I waste your time giving you that plot synopsis? Everybody, especially in horror, has seen The Shining. So I'm not really giving you any new information. But I always like to give a good plot synopsis to set the table. Now, first thing, let's start off with Jack Nicholson, who plays Jack. Stephen King, one of his biggest issues with this story was the casting of Jack, because this is supposed to be just an average guy. And so at the beginning of the story, it could be you or me, you know, if we're a guy, of course. We want to see this guy's descent into madness. Jack Nicholson had just done One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So casting him in this part, automatically you get those Jack Nicholson-isms right away in this movie. Even when he goes for the interview, he just has that a little bit left of center feel to him. And I get where Stephen King's coming from, but on the flip side of that, you don't get a Jack Nicholson performance. So it's a little bit of give and take. I think if you cast somebody else in this role, maybe The Shining wouldn't be as big as it is today. I mean, yeah, you got Kubrick in there directing this thing, and there's so much more to this movie than just Jack Nicholson, but my God, he is such a major part of why this movie is so great, so terrifying, so effective. But there's a few scenes I really love of Jack Nicholson's in this movie. I could probably name off a top 10 scenes with Jack Nicholson in this movie, but I'm going to give you a couple of my favorites. His treatment of his wife, Wendy, I didn't realize that it's pretty early on in the movie. You know, you would think that in a movie like this, his treatment of her would start like in the middle, his bad treatment. But no, I mean, it starts pretty damn early in the movie when she goes to check on him and he's writing, and he is just downright rude to her, if I'm being honest.
Wendy, let me explain something to you. Whenever you come in here and interrupt me, you're breaking my concentration. You're distracting me. And it will then take me time to get back to where I was. Understand?
And you, right away, you feel bad for Wendy. You know, Wendy is the exact opposite of Jack. You know, she is this like shrinking violet. She's so innocent. And, you know, caring. Just everything that Jack is not, which makes you wonder why in the hell did she marry the guy in the first place? But it happens. But going a little bit before this scene, there is a scene at the beginning of the movie where we see Jack waking up and Wendy is sitting next to him. And then as the scene goes on, it starts off on, I believe, the left side of the bed. And then all of a sudden the camera cuts and they're on the right side of the bed. And you could look at that as intentional, and I'm sure it is because it's Kubrick. And it could signify Jack's switch. You know, it's just a subtle little thing that when you're watching this movie, you probably won't even notice it. This is the first time I actually noticed it. My wife actually noticed it. She was like, wait, the camera angle just completely changed. They're on the right side of the bed instead of the left side of the bed. And I guarantee you that's intentional. But then, of course, the other scene, the iconic scene that everybody talks about is the Give Me the Bat scene.
I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains in. I'm gonna bash him right the fuck in.
Wendy walks up and she sees that Jack is typing, and then she looks at what he's typing, and what he's typing is completely insane. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And every single page in this like 400 page novel, it's just that. And so you see what this isolation, the Overlook Hotel has done to Jack. He's gone completely mad.
I think maybe he should be taken to a doctor.
You think maybe he should be taken to a doctor?
Yes.
When do you think maybe he should be taken to a doctor?
As soon as possible. As soon as possible.
And Wendy realizes that, and so she starts backing up and going up the steps. And this performance by Jack Nicholson was Very effective. But also, like I said earlier, Shelley Duvall's performance is just as important as Jack's, because as he is saying these horrible things to her, like he's not going to hurt her, he's just going to bash her brains in. Wendy's reaction to that makes the scene so effective. She really has to go there. And, you know, behind the scenes, Stanley Kubrick was not the nicest guy to Shelley Duvall at all. It's widely known. It's public knowledge now. But she has gone on the record and said that it was a very hard time in her life, but looking back at the movie, she would not have the performance that she did if not for Stanley Kubrick pushing her like he did. And look, this is nothing new. Directors push actors all the time to get the scene. And sometimes they do things they're probably not that proud of. But in the end, as time goes by, 100 years from now, when all these actors are gone, the performances will still be there. And how they got there, it won't really matter as much. But sometimes that's what has to happen in art. Also, another character that is extremely important in this movie is the son, Danny. Danny, I think, is one of the creepiest things about this movie. He has this imaginary friend named Tony. And, you know, just something as simple as just a finger can make something creepy as hell. And it works. It's very effective.
Red drum! Red drum! Red drum! Stop it! Red drum! Danny! Red drum! Red drum!
As the movie goes on, Tony takes over Danny. And by like the last act of the movie, this is some of the most effective scenes in terms of horror. And a big part of that is because of Tony. Now, there are so many characters in this movie outside of Flesh and Bone. The Overlook Hotel itself is a character. Those scenes where you see Danny on his big wheel and he's just going through the halls really sets up the scale of how big the hotel is. And I think the size of the hotel makes the story creepier because it's like the ultimate portrayal of isolation. You take a movie like The Thing, where the isolation seems a lot more confined and contained, and so the characters are closer to each other. But when you have a space that's as big as the Overlook Hotel, you never know where the characters are going to pop up because there's just so much space for them to pop up. And also the score in this movie is a character in and of itself. There are some really unsettling scenes in this movie that are really set up by the score, that are propped up by the score. The one scene with the bathtub when Jack's coming into the room and you see the naked lady getting up and then she transforms into this like old lady. Without the score, yes, very unsettling, but with that score behind it, makes it one of the scariest movies ever created. And just to touch on those conspiracy theories with this movie, Stanley Kubrick, you know, there's that thing with him and the moon landing, where you got Danny's wearing an Apollo shirt, and then, of course, when you have the food pantry, you have all the tang that's there. Then also, there's a lot of, like, Native American imagery in this movie, in the set design, especially with the hotel. In the pantry again, there's like this Native American can of soup. And some have tied this to like the genocide of the Native Americans. And it's just interesting that Stanley Kubrick would layer this story with all these type things that don't really necessarily need to be there. But, you know, it just gets you thinking. And I love movies that do that. They get you thinking outside of the actual story itself and what could this mean and what could this mean. A lot of interesting stuff. I mean, there's even like theories about the Holocaust tied to this movie. But Stanley Kubrick's direction of this movie cannot go unnoticed. It is a major player in why this movie is so effective. And I think that's why so many filmmakers today have copied his style, for lack of a better word. I mean, Nicholas Winding Refn is one of many examples that you see the use of camera work, and it's very similar to what Kubrick accomplished. But I mean, you could copy Kubrick all day, but you'd still never come up with an exact Kubrick movie. He just was that unique of a director. And it didn't feel forced. You know, everything he did behind the camera felt like it was intentional, it felt natural, and it really just felt like part of the story. And you see a lot of directors these days that do that, that try to copy what he did, but for some reason, it feels pretentious. It feels forced. And really, I just watched this movie that I'm going to review called Bloodline, and that was one of my problems with the movie. Aesthetically, very nice looking movie, but it felt a bit pretentious. For some reason, Kubrick was able to make it feel natural, to make it feel like it just happened. You take a movie like this that is, I'll admit, a slow burn, but then you give it probably one of the most effective last acts I've ever seen in a horror movie. With Jack, after he, has the axe and he's coming after Wendy, and you get that iconic scene in the room, the Here's Johnny scene.
Here's Johnny.
And eventually they end up into the maze, which itself is a character in the movie. I believe in the book it was animals, like the shrubs became animals. I think it's more effective to actually make it a maze, because then you got this axe-wielding psychopath chasing his family at night in the dead of winter through this maze. And so you have just all these different elements combined together to make just such an effective last act of a horror movie. Stanley Kubrick didn't forget that. This is a horror movie. Yes, I can be as artistic as I want, but at the end of the day, do I have an interesting story, and have I, more importantly, scared my audience? And he scared the audience tenfold. But I could really talk about The Shining for at least another hour. It's just one of those movies that you could dissect every freaking scene in the movie. It's just perfection to me. It's one of the greatest horror films ever created. It's the ultimate tale of paranoia and isolation, which is probably my favorite type of horror, if I'm being honest. And I think the only movie that comes close to it dealing with those themes is The Thing, which I'm looking forward to doing a revisited for The Thing really soon. But, I mean, no surprise here, it's not getting a Trapped on an Island. It's getting a unicorn. The Shining is a unicorn. So guys, that's my review for The Shining. Post in the comments your thoughts on this amazing film. I hope I did it justice. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day, and on Fridays we do Free For All Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and Red Rum! Red Rum!